Good evening, everybody. Josiah here. I have read the Bible more than once, and there are some things in the Bible that really surprised me when I first read it, and sometimes still surprise me when I read it over again. Some of these things have to do with the spiritual realm, some of them have to do with science, some of them have to do with just the moral implications that are brought up in certain passages. And So that's what I'm going to be talking about right now. Surprising things I found in the Bible. Very surprising things I found in the Bible. One surprising thing that I found in the Bible is in the book of Job. In the book of Job, toward the end of the book, you have God, he's speaking to Job, and he says something very interesting to Job. Now in this dialogue, in this specific passage, God is basically bringing up a bunch of things to Job to humble Job, and that Job may understand there are some things that only God can do, which I think he already understood. But there's God was just bringing this stuff up to him, and so Job can get his eyes focused in the right place. And there's a passage. It's just a very short 1 or 2 verses, and it says this. It says, "Who can send the lightnings? Who can send the lightnings that they may go and say, here I am?" It's very strange, and like he's talking about all sorts of different things, and then he just starts talking about this. He says, "Who can send the lightnings that they, the lightnings, may go and say, here we are, and say hello?" It's like, that's so strange. What's that talking about? Well, I don't know of any recorded history over 1,000 years ago where they had anything like telecommunication. And I know today, and within the last several decades, probably over a century now, definitely over a century now, we have been using electricity to communicate one to another. And it's wild to see that the Bible, and a section of the Bible that was very, very old, written thousands of years ago, probably 3,500, 4,000 years ago, they were talking about what seemed to be telecommunication. Who may send the lightning that they may go and say to you, here we are? Job probably had no clue what God was talking about. But when we read that passage today, it's like, wow, that sounds like he's talking about using electricity to send a message, and we do that now. We do that now. And it's very, very wild. It's crazy. It's very possible that the Bible in that passage describes telecommunication and using your phone, and we can even see entire images through electricity. It's wild. Things that God put in the Bible. But there's another thing in the Bible that that's mentioned, and this one is more in the spiritual end of it. I've talked to a lot of people in my life who have seen dark figures, either in the room or outside or in their house. I know a lot of people personally who have seen stuff like this. As far as I know, I've never seen a dark figure, but I know a lot of people who have. And a lot of those people need deliverance. To tell you the truth, a lot of Bigfoot sightings are basically these dark figures, and they think they're seeing Bigfoot, but in reality, they're probably seeing some form of demon or some form of unclean spirit. Well, it's interesting because, hearing these stories, I'm like, where does this fit in? Where does this mysterious dark figures, usually described as demonic figures, fit in the Bible? Like, where do we see this? And I actually saw it's toward the beginning of the Bible. I think you can find it if you use a New King James, maybe the Old King James. But you can see that one of Job's friends starts talking about seeing some M says Bigfoot probably a djinn. Yeah, Bigfoot's a demon. I definitely believe that. But he describes seeing something dark, like a dark figure, a shadowy figure that speaks to him some type of truth, or some type of information. Gave him some type of information. He's trying to bring it to Job, and so one of Job's friends, from what I was reading, unless I totally misunderstood the passage, it seemed like one of Job's friends had seen, and this unclean spirit communicated with him, and he thought it was of importance. And then we know later God basically says that Job's friends were filled with foolishness. Job's friends were filled with foolishness. Corey says, you just make up this stuff all day? Corey, like, I'm just talking about what the Bible says right now. This is not anything I've made up. Uh, but, you know, it was wild. I was like, wow, it does seem like the Bible actually talks about this stuff. And it was very shocking to me when I first saw that. I was like, whoa, that's actually really cool. And there's other things as well. I'm actually going to be plugging in here because I got to go in the store. Here we go. And don't forget, guys, every doing Ask Your Christian in Anything, where you'll actually have an opportunity to come on, ask questions. If people are respectful, I may even allow them to come on the live stream with me to actually talk. M says there are demons and jinn and mankind. Yeah, I think from my understanding, demons and jinn are like the same thing. At least from a biblical understanding, there's demons and then there's angels, and then there's mankind and then there's God. Let me see here. But here's some other interesting things in the Bible. Some other interesting things in the Bible. And one is the story of Jephthah. In the story of Jephthah, you have this guy who God uses as a judge in the world, a judge on for the children of Israel. And this guy's kind of like he's not a nobody, but he's like a misfit. He's like a famous rebel that ends up becoming one of the judges of Israel. And he goes on this big war, and he actually ends up winning the fight. And he promises to God, he says, God, whatever is the first thing that comes out of my house, I will make as a sacrifice to you. He says, I'll make this a sacrifice to you. And, back in the day, like, they used to actually keep, like, farm animals in the same building as they were in many places, especially rural areas. So it wouldn't have been totally weird for him to say something like that. But then he gets to his home, and he has a one and only daughter. He has a one and only daughter, and his daughter runs out to meet him, thankful that he made it. And he starts crying because he's going to keep a promise he made to God by sacrificing his own daughter, his one and only daughter, his only child, whom he loved. And I find it wild that, that's in the Bible. But something interesting is that nowhere in the Bible does it say that Jephthah did the right thing. All it did was record what he did. And then it has a phrase there where he says, where it says that everyone did what was right in their own eyes. And unfortunately, many of those people that were used as judges, they weren't perfect people. And they did some things that God didn't want them to do. But it's very interesting. The Bible records a lot of bad things that happened accurately, and it never paints what Jephthah did as a good thing. From the reading and the studying I've done in the Bible, so that's very, very interesting. I'm grabbing some bananas here, guys. Wow. So that was something that kind of shocked me.
when I read through the Bible. I was like, whoa, I wasn't expecting that to happen. Why would a godly person sacrifice a child? And but then it never says that God was actually the one that wanted it to happen. Let me see here. My wife sent me with a list. Okay, we gotta get cheese and milk. And there's a lot of other very interesting things in the Bible as well. Another interesting thing that's mentioned in the New Testament of the Bible is a man named that the book of Acts calls Simon the sorcerer. And Simon the sorcerer was this guy that was in the land of Samaria that the people basically worshiped. They said, this is the great one of God. And he performed many signs, many magical arts. And he had deceived the Samaritans to follow him and to worship him. And I found, at times I thought, like if this person was so influential, you would think that there would be more history outside of the Christian history, outside of the Christian narrative. And so then, as I kept on studies, I found that I think it was Justin Martyr. Justin Martyr talked about how in certain places he wrote this letter to the Emperor of Rome, and he said on the coast they literally had a statue of this guy built, saying that this guy was like the mighty one of God, and that there was like 2 different statues that was actually built of this guy, and people would worship it. And Justin Martyr was calling for the emperor to take these things down because this guy was a fraud. He was a fraud, and he was not of God, and he was calling out the hypocrisy of the Romans that they would allow that type of person, but then they would persecute the Christians so heavily. Senat says Jesus is the Savior. Amen. But I found it very, very interesting that this guy that's mentioned in the Bible, Simon the sorcerer, he is not only mentioned in the Bible. He is not only mentioned in the Bible, but instead he's mentioned a lot of in other places as well. And he was actually a big deal, like the Bible describes him to be. And I find that very interesting. I find that very, very interesting. And there's other very interesting parts of the Bible as well. And, as you read, you find there's so much depth. There's so much depth to it. Let me see here. I gotta get 1 gallon whole milk. Right here. Here we go. This is what I need. If any of you guys have any interesting things that you found in the Bible, let me know. Let me see here. That looks good. Let me see here. We got Creepo. Okay, he's gone. No Creepos here. Okay, so let me see here. We got the cheese, we got the milk, we got the nanners. There we go. Trying to think of other interesting things. I get sidetracked so easily, guys. So easily. But there's a lot of really cool stuff in there. Another interesting thing is the mention of unicorns in the Bible. And a lot of people actually mock Christianity and probably Judaism as well, because unicorns are mentioned in the Bible. It's just a fact. But the word that it uses for unicorns doesn't necessarily describe some type of fantasy horse with a horn coming out of its head, and farting rainbows all the time. And it's like sparkly and it has wings, and that's not really how the Bible describes it. In fact, in the book of Job, it talks about the unicorn, and it describes the unicorn as like this creature that's like really tough, that's really big, that is untamable, that you can't use to work the fields, and it's like this really mighty beast. and it's mentioned, I think, 6 times in the Bible, and the word 3 of those times can be translated back to like something like bicorn, which would be two-horned animal. So we have the one-horned animal, two-horned animal, and it actually really fits the description of the rhinoceros. And so they were describing a rhinoceros without using the word rhinoceros. They used the word unicorn because, as we found out, that there was a large population of one-horned rhinoceros that would have been described as unicorns back in the day, which is very interesting. Very, very interesting. Let me see here. One court. Where would this be? I think it'd be over here. Very, very interesting, guys. And also the mention of dragons in the Bible. That's very, very wild as well. Let me see here. Okay. We're looking for that 3. Hold up. Fat free. Does this even exist? I don't even know how they make these fat free guys. It's so weird. It does not exist. It is not existent in here. But yeah, the Bible's mention of dragons, it actually comes up many, many times in the Bible. And people are like, oh, the Bible's just a fantasy book talking about dragons. And it's like, actually, it's not just the Bible, but tons of ancient books, tons of ancient manuscripts all over the world talk about dragons. And apparently just 200 years ago, if you look at like a 200-year-old dictionary, it'll have the word dragon in there and it'll describe what a dragon is. And then it'll say now rare. Like they still believed in dragons 200 years ago, but they just weren't seen very much. And then so when the Bible describes dragons, it's describing something that people describe all over the world. It's very wild. And in fact, the word dinosaur wasn't actually invented. That word didn't even exist until about 150 years ago. The word dinosaur didn't even exist, and all it means is terrible lizard. All it means is terrible lizard. And so prior to the word dinosaur, people would describe these things as dragons, and they were reptile creatures or similar to reptile creatures that were a nuisance that a lot of people would kill off because of the dangers that they would bring. You see here. Yeah, it says, what does word dragon mean? Context of those ancient languages. Back then, it was talked about a real creature. Sometimes fire breathing, sometimes not. But it was definitely talking about a real creature. I mean, we have tons of evidence of that all over different places of the world. I mean, if everyone's saying it, they're seeing the same thing. I tend to believe it. Another crazy thing that's in the Bible is all the geography that they were aware of, like how much of Asia, how much of Africa, how much of Europe they were aware of in the Bible, where they talked about Spain, they talked about Italy, they talked about Ethiopia, Egypt, they talked about Saudi Arabia, they talked about Iran. It was called Persia back in the day. They talked about Russia. They talked about Turkey. Of course, they talk about Israel and some of the immediate places there. They talk about another country in Africa. I think it was called Cyrene, or maybe that was a short for it. But it's amazing. They talk about so many different so many different places, even in the New Testament. Talk about going to Spain, talking about doing this, talk about doing that. And it's like, wow, these people were not unknowledgeable about the world. They weren't just isolated. They knew about the world. It was very interesting. Last chapter says Quran is 600 years too late to the party. This is true. Stink says, hello, what have I missed? Are we talking about Leviathan? Yes, we can talk about Leviathan. It's described like a fire-breathing dragon. Pretty cool stuff. Let me see here. Pretty cool stuff. I'm trying to find a munchie I can grab a munchie for my sweetie, my wife. There's actually all sorts of stories um, across the world describing like water dragons and stuff. And I remember I grew up in California, and I remember in Big Sur, I wasn't alive at the time, but there's photos and there was sightings of like plesiosaurus type of critter that washed up on the beach, not very far away from where I grew up. And there's stories and legends and supposed sightings and pictures all over the place, all over the place. And people talk about like how could it be true? How could there literally be a fire breathing dragon? That's crazy. You actually believe that, guys? We have bugs. We have little fireflies that light up with almost 99% efficient energy. We have um, we have shrimp that kick so hard it creates a pressure wave, like a sound pressure wave. We literally have an animal called an electric eel that produces its own electricity and uses it to kill its predators. That's pretty cool. That's pretty cool stuff. So like if we have all of these things, and not to mention a bombardier beetle, a little bug that blows up out of its butt and kills, things that are trying to come after it. Like actually has like a little acid explosive that it kicks out. But we have all of these things, and if it's possible to have animals that produce their own lights, we have animals that produce their own electricity and will use it, and that can actually kill a human being. Um, and we have animals that do just some incredible things. Why not an animal that can breathe some type of fire or maybe some type of acid smoke? I don't know exactly what it would have looked like, what it would have been, but why not? Why not? I don't see it that far fetched with the actual animals we have in this world. I don't see it that far fetched. Let me see here. We have animals that use echolocation and sonar, like dolphin. They use literal sonar to find their food and to get around. It's crazy. Why why not a fire breathing dragon? Why not? Um, okay. So now I guess she just wants something snacky. Something snacky. But very cool stuff. And these are all things, these are things that are mentioned in the Bible that the Bible actually refers to. It's crazy. It's really cool. And I am glad that I follow a religion that has a book that that is so interesting. And it's not just boring. It's not just a set of rules. It's not just um, it's not just a belief set, but it's also historical. In some cases, scientific. It's also applicable to your own life, and it has a lot of very interesting things in it. Stink says, "Do you think some of these epic creatures of lore the creation of God?" I think so. I think so, and I think some of these creatures, honestly, and this is my opinion, the Bible actually does. In like for example, you have a oh I forgot what it's called. It's basically half goat, half man. Um, I forget what they're called, but there's these half goat, half men, and they're usually depicted as evil. The picture of Lucifer is a half goat, half man. Um, and there's even a passage in they're called satires. Satires is what they're called. And there's actually a depiction of satyrs in, I believe, the book of Isaiah or Jeremiah. I think it was in Jeremiah. And you look up the meaning, and it basically either meant a demon possessed goat or a or an actual like demonic creature. And it's interesting. There's like stories, even stories from legitimate sources. Um, like for example, one big one is the Travel the Road guys. These missionaries that go all over the world and they preach the gospel. They really sacrifice their lives, sacrifice their time to pull off some pretty amazing things. Travel the Road, check them out. But they have one where they're looking for this critter that was said to live in the jungles in a jungle in, oh, I think it was Brazil. I think it was Brazil. Um, but this thing was described as as kind of like a dwarf with a leg of a goat, and then this other leg is like a peg leg or something. And a lot of people go into the area and they disappear, and other people go into the area and they see the thing, and all this crazy supernatural stuff happens. And these missionaries actually went there and they filmed it. They didn't film the actual beast, whatever it was, but they actually went to that place and something happens. They experience something. It like everything matched like what the what the legends described. And so they left. They're like, maybe we shouldn't be messing with whatever this is. And so I think a lot of mythical creatures, I honestly think a lot of mythical creatures are basically demonic. A lot of them are just real creatures, like maybe the dragon. But I think a lot of mythical creatures are actually demonic. And I have a theory that the reason why a lot of these things aren't found anymore is because when Christianity rose, there would be these Christian heroes that would literally go and kill the dragon or kill the gargoyle or the monster that lived in a certain area that was tormenting people. And they were always Christians because they would go in the name of the Lord, and whatever this demonic thing was, they would have the power to kill it, and then they become heroes, especially in like the legends in Europe and stuff. I don't know. I don't know how true it is, but I have a suspect one of the reasons why we don't see a lot of that anymore is because the world has been a lot more Christianized than it was previously. And if the Bible's true, then we as Christians have authority over the world of darkness, and God, God gives us the authority, gives us the strength. The last chapter says, bless you too. China isn't brought with dragon symbology for nothing. Yes, this is true. This is true. Even I think it was Marco Polo. He went to China and described that the king of China had there was a specific office in his parades that was the dragon feeders, the royal dragon feeders, and that supposedly they would have dragons to pull the chariots of the king. Very, very interesting stuff. Stinker says maybe some of the Knights Templar seeked out the demonic entities. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. It's possible. It's possible. I think it's very similar with the giants and the Nephilim topic. I think a lot of the giants and Nephilim were taken out by people who feared God, or people who at least feared God to an extent. Like even in the Americas, there's so many stories of Nephilim and giants that ended up getting killed by people who are trying to save natives who are being brutalized and eaten, and like in the Americas and the Middle East. And I don't know if I've heard any stories from Africa specifically, but a lot from the Middle East, Europe, America, like all these places that used to be pagan. They used to say that they would see these things, and that these things like were like actual monsters, actual demons. And I'm not. I don't feel like I can just push it off and say it's all just fake. I mean, I'm not just going to say that the world's always been exactly the same. There's plenty of normal animals that went extinct because of humankind. I'm sure there's demonically influenced things that have been as well. And so something interesting though is like when we're talking about the Greek or mythological creatures, one interesting thing is the is like sprites. So you have like element sprites, some like water sprites, air sprites, whatnot. There's mythological spirit creature thing, and one of them is like the an air sprite, and what it basically it's this demonic creature that inhabits the air, and it manifests as like some type of figure of the air or whatnot. Well, there's a gentleman in our area who is into New Age and basically paganism, and um, he was, among other things that he would claim he would see, he claimed he saw a whirlwind, a white whirlwind, come out of his forest, and this whirlwind stood at the edge of his forest, and he told it that it was welcome to come to his property. And so it came in and did its thing, like it went around the property, and then it went back into the forest. A white whirlwind, like a misty white whirlwind, almost like ghosty. And he thought it was cool because he was into spiritism and stuff. I remember when I was younger, personal story. I remember when I was younger, me and a buddy of mine and one of my siblings, we saw white whirlwinds, going through the vineyards in our local area of California, and we thought they were like people dusting the crops or some type of machinery. And we watched these whirlwinds go over roads and like go in between, like straight in between the rows of the vineyards, and it scared us really bad. We're like, "What is that?" Because they were probably about we're a distance away, but they're probably about 6 feet tall, maybe more than that. Actually, probably more than that. Probably like 8 feet tall whirlwinds, and there's three of them, and somehow they were able to go through the vineyards. Nobody was there. There's no machinery. There's no sprinkler system that was setting it off. It was wild, and we had three people saw it at the same time. Me and my buddy thought we were going crazy, so we got my sibling over to verify what we were seeing. Crazy stuff. So I do believe that this stuff is real, but when we walk with the Lord, we have the authority and we have protection over these things. Stinker says, I assume you're familiar with the stories of giants living in the Grand Canyon. I really wouldn't be surprised if the Smithsonian, maybe even the Vatican, hide these things. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. Maybe the Smithsonian. I doubt a lot of the conspiracies about the Vatican. I doubt them. It could be true, but I don't know. I don't know. The most pagan thing you can do is convert to Christianity. Amen, Stinker. The most pagan thing you can do is convert to Christianity. That's because all the pagans converted in Europe. The pagans converted in Arabia originally. The pagans converted to Christianity, and in America, the pagans converted to Christianity. It's a wonderful, wonderful thing. A wonderful thing. But let me see here. So if anyone has like any comments or questions, I would love to hang out here a little bit longer. But I am going to be wrapping this up soon. I will be getting on about 8:30 to do the interactive broadcast, Ask a Christian Anything, where you can come on, and hopefully, if people are respectful, I'll be able to bring people actually onto the video to have an actual conversation. So I'm hoping for that. We'll see if it happens. We'll see if it happens. Last time I had a guy come on, he was half respectful, then he just went totally downhill. He's a weirdo, and so I'm hoping we don't get any more weirdos coming on, but they'll probably come. They'll probably come. They come in the comments all the time, and they've come in the video when they get the chance as well. But so But anyhow, I think I'm going to be heading out for now, but join me at 8:30 p.m. EST, and you'll have the opportunity to come on, ask your questions, and I'll do my best as a Christian to answer them. So may God bless you. Hope you guys have a wonderful day.